Hey all, just going to break in here for a hot second to talk to you a little bit about skincare. What does skincare have to do with Kurt Cobain? Literally nothing. But I'm a longtime esthetician. I'm almost 50 and I've been doing that for about 30 years. And a lot of times people will ask me about my skincare regimen. So I thought, I should sponsor my own podcast. That works, right? So I am a brand advisor for a company called No Filter. And their website is nofilterskinclinic.com. I will go ahead and pop that in there. And they are just the best company. They sell the most amazing, incredible skincare brands. I use everything from No Filter. And they have, we've been partners now for a while, and they have offered that if anyone from Who Killed Kurt or who watches our videos buys anything from them, they will actually donate 5% of that sale to our cause. So as you know, we're always paying for things like the website, Zoom, the live software that we go live with. There are just so many costs every month. And then of course, you know, different things that come up, like when we had to pay for the forensic scientist, we're now paying for 2 medical examiners. So I would love it if you would go ahead, and if you do buy skincare online, check out No Filter. And if you have questions, they're great. Or you can just email me if you have questions about your skincare regimen. I would be more than happy to help. And I'm also an acne specialist. So if you are struggling with acne, I have cleared hundreds of clients, especially during COVID. We had a lot of issues with acne and maskne during COVID. So please feel free to check that out. Let's get back to the video. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We are here today with John Potash. We are so excited because we are both big fans, and we're just delighted that you decided to come and join us on the podcast today, John. Lisa, John, everyone knows Lisa. John, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I wrote 2 books and made several films. And the books were it started out. I'd started out on a project that ended up becoming Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and the subtitle is very long, but I'll just say it's the CIA War on Musicians and Activists. I used a long subtitle just to get more views of all the people that are part of it, because of a lot of censorship that's gone on over my course of writing things. And I'd started writing that. I took a tangent from that and to write a book called The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, which I came out with in 2007. After that, I came back to the big project, which was Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and published that in 2015. And then I made a film based on that came out officially in 2019 with Gravitas Ventures distributing that. And then I was making a sequel to Drugs as Weapons Against Us. And in the middle of that sequel, COVID hit. And so I ended up making a film about the corruption that seemed to be going on around, the crazy stuff happening around COVID. And that became Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, but which I came out with as a film with MBD Entertainment Group. And they distributed it. And then I finally came back to that sequel to Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and it came out with that this past fall. In October, MBD Entertainment Group released that, and it's called CIA Drugs or Us, a Drugs as Weapons sequel. And that's like a comic take on new information I have that relates to the Drugs as Weapons Against Us theme.
So you've been around, lots and
Yeah.
lots of work, lots of incredible writing. How did you get into, realizing kind of what the CIA was up to? What brought you here?
Yeah, so I was working, I had a psychology degree in undergrad, and I graduated in 1987 from undergrad, and ended up getting a addictions counseling job full time in 1989, and for doing 1 or 2 other things. And so as I was working with addicts and helping them, I just would hear all kinds of stories from Black Baltimore City residents who said, one who told me my father was a Black Panther killed by the police, that started having me research the Black Panthers. Others talking about the underground music scene, which I was a fan of in terms of alternative music, punk music, and stuff like that, and how heroin was becoming huge in that scene. And I befriended some people in the scene that I didn't even know were turning into heroin addicts at the time. But I would hear things, and I end up finding out and talking to people about visiting musicians from Seattle would start raising questions about things going on there. Just soon after Kurt Cobain's death, they would say people are suggesting that he might have been killed, but I don't know if I can believe that and things like that. And I was researching a number of different areas around U.S. intelligence and underground movements like the Black Panthers, such as the Students for Democratic Society, which was the largest anti-war movement at the time, mostly white, and researching, Black Panther leaders and researching white radical leaders, members of the Weather Underground, for what was a political novel at that time. But I was also researching the intersection of the political musicians. Jimi Hendrix's conversion to activism at the end of his life and wanting to support the Black Panthers. John Lennon's turn to activism and wanting to stop the Vietnam War and talking about being a socialist and things like that. And then I came to just really like Kurt Cobain when he first started, and considered the John Lennon of his generation. I liked his political activism of his time, which people don't really talk about much. But there was actually a book, a biography of Nirvana that came out 6 months before his death, before Cobain's death, that talked about him being wanting to put all kinds of anarchist revolutionary essays in his Nevermind album, on the cover of Nevermind or inside the jacket of Nevermind. But he said he thought he'd wait till he gets famous first, and then people might take it more seriously. But he was kind of radicalized by Toby Vale of Bikini Kill and Kathleen Hanna of Bikini Kill. He's friends with them before he was dating Toby Vale and friends with Kathleen Hanna before he became big. And so I think he was just that was his attitude. He supported abortion rights behind the scenes without talking about it much. He supported anti-war groups and anti-censorship groups and things like that behind the scenes. And he was, so there was a lot going on with him that people just don't even, realize that wasn't allowed. We weren't allowed to see because he, of course, was killed at 27.
Yeah. So when, I recently watched something about how the African American community is targeted and how rappers, if we look back at kind of 70s, 80s, we look back at Run DMC and sort of where rap is kind of starting to evolve. It's all just really fun, cool. And then we get into gangster rap where, and I'm no expert on this, of course, but, where people are starting, where African American rappers and hip hop artists are starting to talk more about using drugs, violence, etc. So I watched a documentary, and of course I've seen yours, about how that was something that was being promoted to keep that community down. Is that something? So that's something that you've seen in different types of styles of music?
Yeah, definitely. And so I came to study the way drugs were used by U.S. intelligence in particular. The clearest is like people tend to know about heroin and cocaine as like just flooding into communities, poor communities of color, and really just destroying communities, because when people develop an addiction, it kind of ruins their whole family and the whole community because of the stealing and dealing and all that hurts communities. But but I also found how other drugs, such as LSD, was even though the CIA was deeply involved with heroin and opiates for really, the people behind the CIA were involved for centuries behind the opium trafficking. And but and with the cocaine and wars in Central America, they were involved in helping get the cocaine into the United States, and There's the Kerry U.S. Senate Kerry report about that admits that the CIA was trafficking cocaine. And I have CIA agents in my film talking about how their fellow agents trafficked heroin from the Vietnam area into the United States to, suppress communities. But I argue that they had a supply and they would get it into communities, but they also needed people to promote it, and they wanted to promote it not just to communities of color, but they also wanted to promote it amongst the activist communities. So, and of course, there's the Black activist communities, but there's also the white anti-war activist community, and that was so they really tried to promote, I argue, their number one drug. One of the top CIA projects behind all this was a project called MK Ultra, and that started in 1953. And now they tried to shred all the documents illegally in 1973, but about 10% of them were apparently still in the accounting department, maybe about 20,000 of them. And so researchers got those documents, and they were able to find that they had a huge list of different drugs that they introduced into the community. I mean, of course, cocaine and heroin are the known ones, but there's MDMA, ecstasy, and all kinds of other drugs. But LSD was a very big one. That was like a really major drug they were trying to introduce. And so they got that. I found evidence of the undercover agents they used to get that into the student anti-war movement, Students for Democratic Society. And so now they also needed to promote the heroin to get people, young people diverted and using it. And they used John Lennon for that. I just show the evidence. In the film, I can't show anywhere near as much evidence, but the section on, I hate to say it, Yoko Ono could be a whole book in and of itself, with the bizarre things going on with Yoko Ono. And I just talked to a Lennon researcher who has been researching Lennon for decades, who says she has just such clear evidence of her long time intelligence work. And but I hope she gets her book out on that. But I'll just say that she was the first person to introduce heroin to John Lennon, according to a friend of both of theirs. She was the first, but she helped push acid, LSD, back in John Lennon's life, when he had gotten away from it. Said he thought he was losing his mind, and a year and a half or 2 years later, her and his publicist get him to try it again, to go back to using it. And meanwhile, it was causing him to have such emotional loss of control that he was throwing up before concerts, because it made him so nervous and without any ability to control his anxiety before concerts. So this is some of the stuff that's done. Now you jump to. Now, there was also key people doing this with MK Ultra, and the assistant director of MK Ultra was a guy named Robert Lashbrook. And Robert Lashbrook, in 1965, as documented by A.E. Hotchner's, A.E. Hotchner was Ernest Hemingway's editor. He said in a book called Blown Away, An Oral History of the Rolling Stones in the 1960s, he said that Lashbrook brought loads of acid, money, and agents to London to get acid in as many rock groups' hands as possible. And so Lennon and George Harrison end up getting their first hit of acid. They're dosed at a party, at George Harrison's dentist party. The dentist doses them, which is totally bizarre. I mean, he could have been sued by these wealthy rock stars for doing that. And then a couple of years later, in 1967, Mick Jagger had actually resisted taking acid for a little while, and the undercover FBI agent David Schneiderman, who was also part of MI5, who was called the Acid King, and MI5 is Military Intelligence 5. It's England's FBI. He convinces Mick Jagger to take acid, to drink tea with acid in it. And then the police come in and they actually bust everyone. They end up promoting the acid by saying, okay, look, here's Mick Jagger taking acid, even though he was talked into it for the first time, acting like he's always taking acid. Schneiderman wasn't arrested at that party, of course. And so that's the way they do things. And so you jump into the the 90s, and you have Courtney Love with this very bizarre life. Okay, she's part of the MK Ultra things happening where they had scientists, MK Ultra scientists, going to both Timothy Leary, the biggest promoter of acids, Millbrook Mansion in the East Coast, and then they had acid scientists and acid agents, people promoting acid for the government, the CIA and MK Ultra, go to these parties out in the West Coast that were called the acid tests, and they were started by a group of military people inside of like that had befriended Ken Kesey, who was a subject of MK Ultra just to make some extra money while he was a research student. A writing student at Stanford. And Ken Kesey, famous for writing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is working at the facility he did the experiment on with the acid on. They supposedly allow him to steal as much acid as he wants and hold constant acid parties there. And then these group of military people who are part of this group who call themselves the Merry Pranksters get him to expand these acid parties in a huge way. First, they have this bus promoted throughout the country by following what was the civil rights bus from Berkeley. The civil rights activists in Berkeley, or who were students at Berkeley at the time, traveled to Freedom Summer with the Martin Luther King Freedom Summer campaign, if you remember that, if you heard about that, yeah, to get blacks, voting rights and all. And so here's this Merry Prankster bus following them through the South, promoting acid behind them while they're promoting, serious activist work. And so then the group comes back to the West Coast, and they're promoting acid like crazy at bigger and bigger parties. And some CIA scientists said we were actually at the parties working undercover. And they, signed depositions from a guy like John Gittinger, who was head psychologist for MK Ultra, saying this in a signed deposition. So this is the way things were happening. So you jump to the 90s, and here's Courtney Love. She is born in that area of San Francisco. She grows up with a mother who was adopted. It was adopted by his family, his parents, the Reeses, who were super wealthy. They have tons of stocks in Bausch and Lomb and gold mining, etc. And the father's kind of a bit of an alcoholic, but he abuses Linda Carroll in her memoir says. And Linda Carroll in her memoir says that she thinks that Courtney Love was abused, possibly at her child care. But it turns out that Courtney Love herself says that she was at her therapist, that she started psychotherapy at 3 years old, which as a psychotherapist myself, I just don't hear about. You don't hear about 3-year-olds going to psychotherapy, yeah. And she says her therapist and her psychiatrist regularly had sex with her, and regularly gave her psychohypnotic drugs like Tuinal and Seconal, which are MK Ultra drugs that were used that with sexual or physical abuse, along with hypnosis, can lead someone to become, programmed or brainwashed, really. But they say, some of the MK Ultra scientists say they really successfully developed brainwashing, which is basically just hypnosis and drugs to lead someone to have, dissociative identity disorder or split personality and or act under hypnotic suggestion. One or either can lead people to, act under your direction. And, it's usually a combination of those things. And
John, can I interject one quick question here? Sure. Sorry, I just wanted to bring it back to MK Ultra for a second.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, please. Okay.
Thank you so much. So super quickly, do you believe that Mark David Chapman was in MK Ultra? Because I've read that he was a part of MK Ultra. And again, just going back to, if we're talking about somebody like Courtney Love and the entire sort of brainwashing program at MK Ultra, do you believe that they were successful in, because I've also heard that there's forensics showing that Lennon was also shot from the front. So we know Chapman's in the back. So right. Do you believe that it was simply Mark David Chapman who killed Lennon, and was that due to MK Ultra, or is there more going on there? Yeah, this is a whole podcast in itself, I know. But
I know, yeah, but it's a good question, because there's two key biographers on John Lennon's death, and the one the guy who killed John Lennon was a lawyer and columnist for the Daily, I believe it was the Daily Mail. And he says he just focused on Mark David Chapman and all the evidence that, he was a victim of CIA's MK Ultra program and was programmed to murder John Lennon. And so, I think his evidence is really strong and really, there, like right on with that, his role, Mark David Chapman's role in that. But then Philip Strongman, a veteran music, writer in England, wrote a book on Lennon that says that he totally agrees with I just forgot his name all of a sudden, the lawyer, Fenton Bressler. Fenton Bressler's book, Who Killed John Lennon. But Bressler, he says also, he just says there's more to it, and that is the fact that this Jose Sangernas Perdomo, his four names, actually Jose Joaquin Sangernas Perdomo. And I say that because Jose Perdomo is a really common name. It's like John Smith. So he was a former Bay of Pigs invasion CIA agent who was a hitman for, the CIA, and longtime CIA agent, was, Cuban exile. And he became a doorman at the Dakota apartment buildings that night when John Lennon was killed there. And so he was the backup shooter, so they probably both shot at John Lennon, and whoever killed him. But, so. Yeah.
So we go back to the parallels then of Yoko Ono, and then leading back into Courtney and Hank and her mother.
Yeah. So here you got Courtney Love, his super wealthy grandparents end up paying off, so her mother, Linda Carroll, they all changed their name for some reason, but Linda Carroll ends up getting sole custody of her daughter from Hank Harrison, the biological dad of Courtney Love. And Harrison went into a depression. He said basically that her super wealthy parents, Linda Carroll's super wealthy parents, bought out his lawyer and caused him just to throw the case. And he lost total custody of Courtney Love at about 6 years old. But that at that point, some really bizarre stuff happened. Meanwhile, Linda Carroll's the godmother, the person she signed for the godmother for Courtney Love, is this extreme right-wing estate owner who was battling with Cesar Chavez and these migrant workers. And so Courtney Love ends up being still going to all these therapists and psychiatrists. But at 13 or 14 years old, she finds she's in a delinquent facility, and she writes a letter near Hank Harrison, and her mother is in another part of the world. And so she writes letters to Hank Harrison to get her out of this juvenile delinquent facility, and saying that my therapists were regularly having sex with me. They gave me the Tuinal and Seconal. And he gets her out of there, but finds that she's been turned into some kind of monster in some ways. She had a serious addiction. She was prostituting herself for getting more drugs, and just leaving needles around his house. So his new wife just said, I can't take her being around, leaving dirty needles on the floors around here. So he had to kick her out if she didn't stop using, and she didn't stop using. So he ended up being in touch with her, but more from afar. This time, even though he got her out of this juvenile delinquent facility, and so he ends up moving he goes to Dublin for research on a book. He was a writer and a psychotherapist himself, and so he moves to Dublin to do research on a book there. And she comes there at 16 years old, just turning 17, with 1,000 hits of really strong acid, according to all biographers. And she then ends up meeting a guy named Stephen O'Leary, and Stephen O'Leary ends up saying that he ends up on his deathbed sending a letter to Hank Harrison, according to Harrison in the first version of his book Love Kills. Before he came out with in perfect bound form, he was sending a PDF version to people that were in contact with him, like myself. And so he sent me a PDF version of it, and it shows a letter from the CIA. He says that where on his deathbed, Stephen O'Leary says, Well, I wasn't a CIA an agent per se, but I had to regularly weekly report to the U.S. Embassy to give them a regular reports on what I was spying on, basically,
Mhm.
and then so he ends up having sex with 17-year-old Courtney Love and taking acid with her, takes her to England and has her she spreads the acid around to all the musicians and also brings loads of pain pills and other drugs there, spreading them around like candy. And that matches that Robert Lash book behavior from the 1960s. And so then she does the same thing. She repeats that pattern through Portland, Oregon, through a number of major cities with big, up and coming music scenes for alternative music and punk music. She goes to Los Angeles, does that. She does that in New York, actually. She does that in, of course, Seattle. But in Los Angeles, she gets married to the top punk rocker. And tries to manipulate him. And then he ends up divorcing her, thinking she was some right wing crazed woman. But in between that, I meant to say that she was also prostituting in at least two Asian countries,
Mhm.
and it's admitted in a letter she wrote to a boyfriend. I prostitute myself for you to get back, you get the money to get back to you or something. And so comes from a established biography of her. So she's really got this bizarre life. So whether she was had dissociative identity disorder and was a victim of hypnosis, or whether she was just working as a prostitute and prostituted herself to U.S. intelligence, I don't know for sure, of course, but it's either is possible. And
John,
so,
is there any like factual evidence to the stuff about Hank actually being involved with the CIA himself through the Grateful Dead type?
I've never seen that or heard that. It's possible. I just don't know. I just never seen that. Now, the Grateful Dead, I do think, was doing the bidding of U.S. intelligence and MK Ultra when they did those acid tests, when they played those acid tests. So, sure, but Hank Harrison did end up falling out with the Grateful Dead because he wrote a book about their dealing heroin, and so that whatever connection he might have to them and U.S. intelligence, there probably was some falling out, but I just don't know for sure. Yeah, so I just haven't seen the evidence. I mean, if someone has the evidence, I'd like to see it, but I
see, people tend to connect Courtney to all this through Hank rather than the other way around, the way you're explaining it. Like,
yeah,
Courtney was the one with the actual connections, whereas she was asking for Hank as a way out. People tend to spin that as she was connected through Hank. That was how I always believed it to be.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, I can't say I know for sure, but I think right now my evidence leans towards Courtney and her biological mom. Now, her biological mom, there's a lot more to her because she ends up being the therapist for some members of the Weather Underground. And that's a bizarre thing because they really, U.S. intelligence really targeted members of the Weather Underground who were bombing, facilities like anti-war facilities around the country to stop the Vietnam War. Now they had already infiltrated the Weather Underground a bit, but so they were trying to manipulate them. But the Weather Underground were some of the best and brightest of the Students for Democratic Society, and they were, led astray by too much acid. Their brains were, hurt by too much acid and manipulated. But still, Bernadine Dorrance, a brilliant lawyer who was head of the Weather Underground and was, did great work after she kind of sobered up a bit and all that. And she still is a, brilliant woman who, her husband's another story, I think, if you saw my second movie sequel. But Billy Ayers comes from one of the wealthiest families in the country, and he's more suspect. And so I think he was put in court in Bernadine Dorrance's life to manipulate her. But she, I think, still did great work despite him attempting to manipulate her, during her work. I mean, in SDS, she did great work without manipulation. But then when he came in to manipulate her, Bill Ayers, she still did some good, really good work in the Weather Underground, I believe, to help stop the Vietnam War. So.
Do you think Kurt was aware of all of this with Courtney, like at a certain point?
Yeah, and he was divorcing her, according to Rosemary Carroll, their lawyer, who he considered a mother figure to him. And so Rosemary Carroll, I mean, Tom Grant has on tape Rosemary Carroll saying that, you know, he wanted to get a divorce lawyer, wanted to cut Courtney out of his will, you know, was divorcing Courtney. And then, you know, sadly, Rosemary Carroll was both their lawyers, so it was bizarre. But Courtney Love asked Rosemary Carroll to get her the most vicious divorce lawyer that she could find. And so, yeah, but right before his death, yeah, he was trying to get away from her by all means possible. It's just that he loved his daughter and wanted to see his daughter. So while he was touring and while people on his tour, his European tour, said that he wasn't using any illicit drugs, he said, you know, I'd like to see Frances. You know, can you bring Frances over to see me? She brings Frances over, and she brings her prescription of Rohypnol from that she had gotten in England, and the Rohypnol is roofies, but it's legal in England, the sleeping pills. So he takes a drink of something and goes into a coma for 24, you know, however many hours, and it's because obviously it must have been she's the leading suspect to have dosed him with a huge amount of Rohypnol or roofies, and he can't remember what happened the night before because it's roofies. And so, yeah, that was obviously her first attempt to kill him. And, you know, and the fact that the police do not investigate her for that murder attempt right there, that assault on him is right there, like, you know, one of many points of suspicion of why the police don't investigate the most natural first suspect, which is the wife of someone, especially, you know, when they're getting divorced. When, you know, when the it's obvious, you know, he was trying to get away from her and trying to divorce her. I mean,
Can I
Rosemary
ask,
Bell said it and all that. So
can I ask quickly too? So Tom Grant, have you ever spoken with him? Because we know he's tried to discredit Hank in a big way. And it seems now, as we're discovering more things, Hank is
yes,
actually spot on about
yeah,
most things. Can you elaborate maybe on what you think is happening with Tom or whether you've
yeah.
ever spoken with him?
I've only spoken to him really briefly, and I've been meaning to try for a longer conversation. But he apparently is just has got a very pro kind of for love of God and country kind of attitude, you know, just like so I don't he just has never, even though I think he did some great work around the case, and everyone knows him a lot for that. I think he will never go any further. You know, he won't go far enough to say like, why is the police acting this way? He just thinks, you know, he just acts like they're doing it um, to to hide their original foul, you know, original like fumbling and foolishness. They don't want to get the you know, the city of Seattle sued for, he says, for a bunch of copycat suicides, and that just, you know, that's just naive. I think it just doesn't go far enough. He obviously, you know, so that's just a shame. But otherwise, I mean, he did some great work. It's too bad that he totally dismisses the Alan Wrench situation, because obviously Eldon Hoke said on tape, you know, go look at Alan Wrench. He took the, you know, he took the offer, and so he's a key part of all this. Alan Wrench, you know, another bizarre individual, but and so yeah, Hank does seem to have. I mean, Hank's not the most perfectly credible witness, but I took this huge volume he sent me in the PDF, went through it really carefully, took out all the best parts of it, and asked him, "Can you give me, you know, some of the other sources for these key points?" And when he could, I then, you know, tried to find backing information for them, like the stuff on Steve O'Leary. And I found his, you know, obituary, and found that yes, he does have a brother named Kevin O'Leary, and yes, he died in the place Hank said he died, and around the time he said he died, and so it all just you know, added up, and so it was backing for what he was saying. I think Hank, you know, yeah, again, I think he kind of contradicts himself at times, but I think about the most important stuff that I could find backing for, he's on target. And you know, and so at the scene of Cobain's death, you had several people that were very close to Courtney Love that could obviously, and these were Mike Kelly DeWitt, who was a former boyfriend of Courtney's, who she foisted on Cobain and as a nanny for their Francis, and this guy Renee Everett, it was a bodyguard who was foisted onto to Kurt Cobain as bodyguard, who Cobain tried to fire, and and Courtney hires him on again, and they're both heroin addicts. Getting their heroin from Courtney Love is a clear way to manipulate them. And the final person is Eric Erlandson. Now, Eric Erlandson is a completely suspect man who was part of Courtney Love's first band, Hole, but he also was the boyfriend of Kristen Pfaff, the last person seen at her death scene. The person clearly should be implicated for murder, intentional or not. And
No.
so, yeah.
John, I'm so sorry. I just need to ask you because Eric's denying that he was ever there at her death scene. Do you have any evidence showing that he was there, or anyone corroborating that? Because that's our belief as well.
Yeah. So I show the end note in my book of it was Wallace and Halpern documented, talking to Kristen Pfaff's close friend who had driven with her out there, and he said he saw Eric Erlandson come to that scene, go into her place, and then and so that's he was an eyewitness to that. Yeah.
Is this the guy that was supposed to be sleeping in the back of the moving van or something?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can never remember his name for some reason, but
yeah, it sounds like Eric Erlandson, but it's Paul Erickson, I think his name is. So
Paul Erickson, that's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
Like that, yeah.
Let's go back to the death of Kurt Cobain. So you believe that obviously that Rome was the first attempt. At what point in the marriage do you think Courtney, or was she instructed to get rid of her husband, or was it also part of her that she wanted the money, there was a prenup, etc.? So how does that manifest itself?
Yeah, I think that when Kurt, I think she was like placed into Kurt Cobain's life in order to kind of say, okay, this is a target of manipulation. This is because the way the way CIA does things, and U.S. intelligence does things, is they do psychological profiling of people. This is known really well amongst the Black Panthers. They would psychologically profile each person. It was in a movie called All Power to the People by former Black Panther Lee Lu Lee, who went to the film industry and made some Academy Award, like he was involved in Academy Award, or Academy nominated at least, I think, Academy Award winning documentaries. And so he made this great film called All Power to the People. And in that, he covered the Panthers in a huge way. And he said that former CIA agent John Stockwell, who I actually got to talk to in 1990 or 91 when he was lecturing in Baltimore, but Stockwell told him that CIA had done psychological profiling of Huey Newton, and they basically manipulated him the rest of his life from about 1970 or 69 or 70 onwards. But so I think they psychologically profiled certain musicians and found that Kurt Cobain had this massive stomach problem, and he had tried opiates a few times to try to get rid of that stomach problem, but he hadn't developed a habit at that point, and all his friends in the music scene say he hadn't developed a habit. But so he'd be the best person with, Nevermind rising up the charts. They put Courtney Love. They first had Courtney Love with what's his name, Smashing Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins. So she first was with him, and then she left him immediately when Nevermind was rising up the charts, because Smashing Pumpkins, album was rising before that. And she goes immediately to Cobain, manipulates him to start using drugs, heroin regularly for the first time, gets pregnant immediately with him, and he does the right thing and ends up marrying her with a prenuptial agreement. And but then when he starts seeing what she's all about, with sleeping with other people and just trying to control him and all that, she, eventually, is ready to, says he wants to divorce her. And so I think she was ordered to do that in the same way that she was guided to go to the British music scene, in the same way as she was guided to all these other music scenes in the United States. She actually had lived with Joe Strummer for a short period.
Oh, you're kidding.
Can you imagine that?
No, no, I can't.
One of the, yeah, I mean, he was married, Joe Strummer, at the time, but here she is getting into the homes of the really arguably the top radical, political and, successful, most talented musicians in the world. She's getting in their homes, and and she marries that top punk musician who's a leftist over in Los Angeles. His name's Moreland. I forget his first name.
James Moreland. Yeah.
James Moreland. Yeah. And so, this, and she's a right-wing fanatic. She says the wars were good with us. I slept with, generals in Alaska, and they told me the wars were, explaining why the wars were good for us. And so she's got the opposite politics, even though she pretends to be something else. And so she's being directed in this way. I argue that's just, one way I can see it. Yeah.
John, I have one more question, just kind of off
Sure.
topic where we're at, but as far as like the title, the 27 Club, like, what's your take on that? Is that just something that they like created in a way to distract us from everything else that was going on, and it just fell that way? Or
yeah, I've got two takes on that, I guess. I think one of the takes is the fact that U.S. intelligence, I found loads of what I called in my first book, when Tupac Shakur, threat timing tactics. They've got a lot of threat timing tactics. They murder, for example, they murdered the comrade of Patrice Lumumba, the first independent president of the Congo. They assassinated him, Patrice Lumumba. Exactly 40 years later to the day, they assassinate his comrade. I just forgot his name, Laurent Kabila. When he becomes, his revolution finally succeeds, and he becomes head of the Congo. And the Congo is a very important country. It's got tons of resources, very important place. And there was just a great movie done on Patrice Lumumba called Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. It was nominated for an Academy Award. Should have won it, didn't win it, but fantastic film won that, and the incredible international battle over the Congo. But anyway, so they did the same thing with Huey Newton. They did it with Martin Luther King, the exact year to a day that he announced officially that he was against the Vietnam War and was going to organize against the Vietnam War. He's assassinated Martin Luther King, and the lead, kind of researcher for that assassination, the friend of Martin Luther King who did that, guy named William Pepper, said that was no coincidence. It was the exact year of the day. There's, they're sending a message, a subconscious message that way. And so I think the 27 Club could be a little bit of that. Like, if you get too political, this is what can happen to you. Okay, a death at 27 kind of thing. I think they also, in their research, they find that musicians that write about, love and romance and, heartbreak and whatever else, by the age of 27, they start turning more political, and they start writing about politics. I think that's what they kind of see that, and they start getting more political. They start getting more serious about, things about, activism. So I think there's like those two possibilities there. I'm not sure of that, but again, I show a lot of the evidence of the threat timing tactic in my FBI War on Tupac Shakur book. I don't think I wrote about it in my Drugs as Weapons Against Us book, but I'm not sure. I may have a little bit on it there. I'm not sure, but I think there could be some of that though, because there's just too many, that did. I mean, you were talking about Jimi Hendrix. We're talking, John Lennon. Not John Lennon. I mean, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, who I have in my. She became seriously activist by 27, and was working on these anti-war benefits. That were going to be in Shea Stadium and other stadiums. And it was not that big at that point. Nowhere had they had anti-war benefits in stadiums like that until she joined that cause. Yeah. So,
With Janice, it's interesting too, because I read a little bit about her death. And so she supposedly takes this heroin, a lethal amount, walks down to the lobby of the hotel, buys some cigarettes, comes back up, and then ends up flopped over the bedstand. And the police can't find any heroin. There's no needles. There's nothing to show that she ever even did any heroin. In
I
that
never heard
at
that
that.
aspect of it. I can believe it. I never
Yeah,
heard
it's
that.
very
But
strange.
yeah, I show other evidence. I mean, U.S. intelligence was in her life early on. I mean, a guy who had told other friends that he was working for the FBI had become her first fiance. I mean, and engaged to her, got her hooked on speed, got her using speed regularly. And then she ends up finding, but she's still planning on marrying him, and just trying, dealing with the speed situation. And she finds out he's got a whole nother family. So she breaks off the engagement. So this and all the best evidence of this guy's history does suggest, does support that he was working for U.S. intelligence in some way. And so they recognize her incredible talent and her abilities early on, and were trying to manipulate her early on for sure. And
Now,
so yeah.
can I ask, John, why do you believe that Renee, Eric, and sorry, who was the other person you said was there?
Kelly.
Callie. Yeah, we know
Kelly.
Callie was there. So when we talk about the statement that we have from our witness, he names other people as well. So can you tell me why you believe that Renee and Callie and Eric were the three sort of involved parties in Kurt's death?
Yeah, that comes from Hank Harrison's book. So
Okay.
I can't say for sure, because Hank Harrison didn't give his exact sources of information. So I think that the key is just that a group of strong people, they found Valium in his system, in Cobain's system. So they likely dosed his drink with a lot of benzo Valium and got him super groggy, and then got some strong people to grab him and do what they need to do to him, which was inject him full of the heroin and then shoot him, I guess. Is what we're told, and I believe it happened. And so, that's just, whether it's those exact people or not. I mean, obviously Michael Calley DeWitt was there.
Yes.
And we know that, well, the best evidence is that Courtney Love was still paying for Renee Everett to be his bodyguard, but it comes from apparently this guy Everett True, I think his name is. That's who actually Hank Harrison did source him as saying things about that.
Yeah. Now, so when we look at now, the police come in, it's, they find the electrician calls the police, and then they find him. And all of a sudden, by 9:30 a.m., they go, okay, this is a suicide. So at this point, do you believe that the police were made aware of this prior to the fact? How do you think that transpires with the Seattle police?
Yeah. So, according to all the best sources, Wallace and Halpern and Tom Grant and whoever else was talking to them and interviewing them, and some Seattle reporters actually did talk to some police who said some of this stuff, but long after the fact, we'll say. But police officers come there, they see this, they said they saw a note that the writing clearly changed an important part of the note, the suicide note, and so it looks like just a goodbye to fans, because he was breaking up Nirvana in terms of Nirvana ending. And both the other musicians apparently said that in different reports, Chris and Dave Grohl, and Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl. And so, so they saw that. They were like, this should be investigated more. This is bizarre. And yet their boss said, this is not to be investigated as anything but a suicide, and not to be, and so I think that's the way it tends to work in leadership, is the lowest police officers, unless they're working for police intelligence, which a number of them are, they are not privy to, they're not privy to anything, but the higher ups are a little more privy. They're not told everything, but they're told this is the way you're supposed to handle it. And I think the higher ups in police were being told by police intelligence and or U.S. intelligence, this is only to be investigated as a suicide. So he's told part of what's going on without enough to having me be able to blow a whistle on anything. And that's the way it proceeds. So one officer associated with the, Cobain, this Antonio Terry, ends up investigating on his own the source of the heroin. Spent supposedly 200 hours, according to the Seattle newspaper, someone who investigated it. And he ends up becoming the first police officer to die in 7 years, while on the force, to be murdered on the force. And that's an awfully big coincidence. And that just shows some of the high level cover up of this kind of thing. And really only U.S. intelligence has that kind of power for that kind of cover up. But it's just, it's Eldon Hoke going to the Los Angeles Police Department and saying, hey, this is what happened. This happened here in LA. Courtney Love offered me $50,000 to kill Kurt Cobain. And, could you please investigate this? And so how does Courtney Love have that much power over Los Angeles Police Department too? I mean, obviously, the Los Angeles Police Department is a hotbed of U.S. intelligence. If you look at Tom O'Neill's book called Chaos, about Charles Manson, the secret history of the 60s, that just was made into a documentary on Netflix by Academy Award winner Errol Morris. The book just shows the incredible amount of overlap between U.S. intelligence and Los Angeles police and state's attorney's office, et cetera. It's just, U.S. intelligence has so much power, and Los Angeles Police Department has so much power, regarding different political murder, Tupac Shakur's murder. DreamWorks tried to do a documentary about the police whistleblower in Los Angeles who uncovered, the murder of, all the foul play and the murder of Tupac Shakur, and they were shut down by the Los Angeles Police Department. And then what's his name? Rocky Sylvester Stallone tried to do it before that, and it was announced, the movie was announced, it was all going through. Los Angeles Police Department shut it down. And finally, you had, what's his name? The one did finally come out with Johnny Depp playing the police whistleblower and in Los Angeles Police Department. And that finally came out, but it only came out during COVID. It was very censored, and it was very little seen because it came out during COVID. So most people haven't seen it. But
speaking of the power of the CIA, why are you not concerned for your own safety and health? Have you ever gotten weird phone calls, threats? Why are you, do you feel like a lot of people feel the more I put my name out there, the safer I am, the Fox Mulder thing, they don't want to make me a martyr?
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely, I mean, I've stayed, my stuff, obviously they censor me in a big way. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why it's so hard for you guys to gotten a hold of me. So much of my stuff is censored. So much of my stuff is blocked. So much, my wife was looking at our phone, crazy things were happening with my phone for a while. And like radio interviewers would say, what just happened? We just lost you. One radio interviewer was talking to me from Pacifica Radio in, I think it was from New York. And all of a sudden, the line just starts playing. Like when they called me, all of a sudden I get my voicemail answering and saying, please leave a message and he'll, get back to you, and then hangs up on us. Like just, and she, they try to call back. It's hard to get a hold of me. And finally I call them and we get the interview going again. But my phone wasn't supposed to work that way, In another situation, it's a syndicated radio program. They said all our computers got shut off all of a sudden, and they don't know how. It's never happened before in an interview. So many things kept happening like that. But thankfully, I got enough interviews that got the word out a bit, and it's just my wife talks to our Verizon company that is dealing with our phones, because now my phone wasn't working for like a few mile radius all around our house. And so she's talking to them for hours trying to get to the bottom of it. And they say, so your backup email is blank, 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 NYPD, .org. And I was like, and she's like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
So
right.
this started when I was living in New York City,
Wow.
researching all this. And when I was giving the first copies of the book, of my Tupac book, to various Black Panthers around the country that I met at different conferences. And they've been tapping my phone and messing with my phone and messing with my electronics ever since. And, so that's what I'm stuck with. So they are messing with me, but hopefully just, it's been so long now that hopefully it's just not in a more serious way than that, we'll see.
Right.
So can I ask you one more question, John? And thank you again for spending all this time with us. We're going to link to your books below. So maybe I'll send you an email and you can send me the links that you'd like us to promote, because I know our watchers are going to want to read more and see more as well. John, do you think that, so we have a forensics team, medical examiners, a legal team, like we have an angel investor. We kind of have everything that we need to have. Do you think we can get this case reopened?
Well, I don't know if it can be, because of the fact that, these police departments with their police intelligence are tied. They're at the low end of the totem pole, with FBI over them, CIA over the FBI, and that's the kind of hierarchy of it all. But some people say there are changes going on in the government, that's there's some attempt to dismantle the CIA. I don't know if that's really going to happen or not. If that did happen, maybe something could change. But I don't know if unless that happens, I don't think we could get it reopened. But I think the kind of work you guys are doing just helps expose it so much, that and of course that I try to do and other people try to do, Wallace and Halperin and other researchers try to do, that we're just getting the word out there enough that I think we're changing, the way people see this history. So that's a great thing.
That's what we hope too. If we change one person's mind, and as you know, there are many copycat suicides, especially in the Cobain case, a lot of copycat suicides. We have one from a year and a half ago. A young guy took his life on April 5th, still partially related to Kurt. So the more we can change how people perceive Kurt and the narrative around his death, I think, we truly hope and believe we can get it reopened. But, even if we can't, the more we get the word out, maybe it'll be the next generation. We'll see. But
if you could find a new sympathetic Seattle police commissioner, that'd be great. It'd be great to get it reopened. Yeah, it's just hard to know if it's possible to.
Obviously we know that Courtney, and it'll be scapegoated on Courtney regardless of who was we know Courtney did have a part in it, obviously, but we know that it probably won't go any further up the chain than that anyway. So
that's true. Yeah, that's true. Sadly enough. Yeah. So thanks so much for the interview, and it was really good talking with you. And if you ever want to talk again, just give a shout out, and we'll see.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, John.
My pleasure, Lisa and Michelle. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Guys.
Thank you so much. I'll send you a quick email and then we'll get all your links hooked up on our YouTube as well. Perfect. Okay. Thanks, guys. It was lovely.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.